Well, Kevin, these are interesting times in the US with the two states embarking on legalization. What do you make of where things are at the moment?
Well, I think obviously it's pretty early. Voters voted on this a year ago. We're still waiting to see the first retail shop open. That hasn't happened yet. What has happened is other parts of the law have been implemented. We know a couple of things. We know in Colorado it does seem to appear already that marijuana-related drug referrals in schools have gone up in Colorado. I don't think they're tracking that in Washington, but in Washington they have seen an increase in marijuana-impaired driving. Still early to say, is that because they're actually looking for it now, whereas before they would stop at alcohol, since that's an easier way to prosecute someone with impaired driving. Or is it an actual increase in impaired driving? We still need to see what's happening. I think undoubtedly what's happened is that we're seeing a new industry emerge. And I think that's the fear that many of us have had, is that once you get folks whose business it is to increase addiction, then you have a public health problem on your hands. And we're beginning to see the seeds of that already start.
And yet, on the other hand, if you look at Nevada, Hawaii, California, there's been quite a degree of normalization through the medical cannabis, and we've seen youth rates of use decline quite steadily.
I think it really, first of all medical cannabis states are not alike. So California is not Nevada, which is not Hawaii, which is not New Mexico, which is not Maine, and we can go on and on. I think out of those three, California is really the only place with widespread retail sales. And there is evidence. There's been actually youth increases. And actually there's really good evidence, recent evidence, that in states with retail sales outlets as well as home cultivation, that those two things tend to be what actually has driven use, whereas in states that don't have those two characteristics of their medical cannabis policies, they haven't seen those increases. So I think we really need to tease out the fact that not all medical cannabis states are alike. I mean, I think for anybody going to California and any visitor, they can sort of see that the $100 assessments by the girl in a bikini who then gives you a card for you to go buy Super Silver Haze has turned into really a joke. This is not really about compassion in many cases, and people are really seeing right through that, especially kids.
If you look at someone like Steve Rolls from Transform, I think people might be quite surprised at how much the two of you actually agree on.
Yeah,
the key
I
thing,
agree.
Yeah, the key thing you disagree on, of course, is the desirability of the legal status of cannabis.
If everyone in the world was Steve Rolls and implementing the blueprint that he has, I may not, and many others may not have a problem with legalization. Unfortunately, that wonderful plan and things that they've put together is not what everyone else subscribes to, what a lot of people subscribe to. And if you go to California, Colorado, Washington, or other places where there's been widespread promotion and commercialization, it's very clear that that's not what they subscribe to. So I don't doubt that a lot of people coming from this do not want to see the emergence of big tobacco or big alcohol. But I think that is inevitably what's going to happen, no matter how well you construct this, especially in a place like the US. The idea that we could have a Uruguay model of non-commercialization goes against everything that we've done for the last 300, 250 years with regards to alcohol and tobacco. And so I just think that they're great ideas, but in reality, that's not everyone's going to play by the rules.
So would you say that the US is in danger of providing an example of what not to do?
Yeah, actually, I think that, frankly, what's going on in Colorado and Washington may be the very thing that undoes the momentum, because people are actually going to see what this looks like. The fact that legalization is not just about your quirky uncle or artsy neighbor smoking a joint once a week after work. It's about the Joe Camel of marijuana. It's about retail establishments in your face right now in Colorado that are literally giving away joints as part of flood relief. I mean, so I think when people say, wait a minute, did I sign up for this, or did I sign up to not imprison low-level users, they may see that what they signed up for is not what they had bargained for when they voted for it.
So how do we deal with the criminalization issue?
Well, I mean, I think that there are some simple things that can be done. I think it's pretty clear that there's not really an appetite, nor resources, nor a need to jail low-level users. And frankly, that's not what's happening by and large in the U.S., but there are definitely instances where that does happen. I think the larger harm, and not so much the imprisonment, because we're not seeing that as much, but more the residual effects of an arrest record. So does it make sense to penalize a kid when he's 30 applying for a job for a joint that he got caught smoking smoking in a car when he was 18? Probably not, and we need to figure out much better ways to deal with it rather than the criminal element. So I think you can hate the drug war, hate imprisonment, but also hate even more this issue of legalization. And when we think about certain communities that have been impacted disproportionately by the criminal justice system, which no doubt that has occurred, the idea that you want to replace one travesty, incarceration, with another travesty, a public health disaster, with the big companies promoting and advertising in those areas, I think makes no sense. It's a false dichotomy. I think we can do better than either of those two things. When we look here in New Zealand or in the US or around the world, and we look at tobacco or alcohol outlets where they are most likely to be and also where advertising occurs, they're 4 to 8 times more likely in poorer, disadvantaged communities of color. And I think that that's a huge issue that we really need to think about before signing up for legalization. So, I think, again, let's try some other things before going down the road of something that really is irreversible. I mean, I don't think anybody can defend current alcohol policy in New Zealand or the United States and say that it is public health focused. I think that's very difficult. Now, the idea, though, that we're going to go back to alcohol prohibition is a dream. I mean, nobody would want to do that, including myself, for a lot of cultural and other reasons. It's an example of how once these things pick up steam, with the commercialization engine driving them, they're very difficult to reverse.
What are those better ways and other approaches likely to be? Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, I think we need to focus on early intervention, whether it's in health settings or justice settings. In other words, a kid is arrested for a petty crime, let's say shoplifting, with a joint in his pocket and other issues that he has. We need to do assessments to see actually what the issues are. Does this person have a substance abuse issue? Is it an issue with social and economic development? Does he need to go to a better school? What's his home life like? What's going on in the community with regards to his health care? I mean, that's kind of holistic approach to actually see what the problem is, as opposed to saying, oh, he has a joint, we'll give him an arrest record or a $100 fine, or look the other way. I don't think that's a comprehensive way. I also think in the healthcare system, physicians are woefully undertrained when it comes to substance abuse generally. When it comes to cannabis, probably even more, because the idea of a lot of cannabis treatments are not very well known among health professionals. I think these are things that we can do to increase the fact that to get people help when they need it. Not everyone that uses needs help, but those that do, get them help, and the others figure out what is needed in that system. Why is that kid falling through the cracks? Why has he been arrested 12 times for different petty crimes in the last 2 years with no sort of accountability other than making him do community service? What can we do, I think, to sort of make those issues better? I think we would be better off if we did that.
What do you do if everything does turn out to be fine at school and fine at home, and he's just a kid who got caught with a joint in his pocket? What do you do then?
Well, I mean, I think the idea that you would have at least some mandatory education or some kinds of interventions to show, listen, you are potentially hurting your body. You could potentially be 1 in 4 kids if you're 14 or 1 in 6 if you're 16 to become addicted. You could potentially hurt your chances for a job because, legal or not, employers don't want to hire people that get stoned all the time, and and move on. I mean, I think that's really what you might do in that case.
In terms of education, you wrote recently that the old just say no type DARE approach is ineffective. What works better?
Well, I think DARE was effective in certain ways and in certain contexts. I have to put that into context. But I think the idea behind what I was saying is that one-shot single programs, the idea that you're going to have a health class in your 9th year in which you're going to talk about drugs once, and then imagine that no one's going to be using drugs as a result of that classroom exercise is probably, a bit of wishful thinking. We need comprehensive approaches to prevention, which means not just in school, but first of all, parents need to be educated. Parents don't realize that today's weed is not the weed from the 60s. It's not the weed they smoked innocently in dorms in the 70s. It's a lot more powerful. They need to step up as parents and provide that leadership. A lot of today's parents don't realize that. I think we need to deliver prevention in different settings. So if it's a community where faith is very important, in religious settings, they need to be given the tools to deal with it. In other kinds of community settings. So I think community-based prevention, where you have different people coming around the table, seeing what the local problem is. Because the problem in Wellington may not be the problem in Auckland, is most likely not the problem in Los Angeles, let alone London. So depending on the city and the context of where you're at, assess what it is, make it data-driven, and try and deliver, yes, you do need to deliver messages that show drug use is harmful and other things, but deliver them into different settings as opposed to, a few times a year in a classroom.
We've seen in the case of smoking tobacco, it's gradually being squeezed out of popular culture. It's controversial in movies now. It would seem there would be quite a way to go before that happened with marijuana, which is all over popular culture. I mean, do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the reductions that are such a public health success in tobacco is due to the fact that there is a societal norm against tobacco. I mean, I don't even know smokers who like to smoke or like the fact that they smoke. I mean, it's become taboo even among the users. There's no pro-tobacco lobby other than big tobacco, but in terms of campaigners, you don't see that as much. Even big tobacco acknowledges the health harms at this point and basically says, look, we're supplying to people who want it. It doesn't cause other harms other than to yourself. But the idea that we're going to have that for marijuana, I think we're very, very far off from doing that. And I think it's a huge disconnect between the science, of which there is no controversy. I mean, it is not a debate that cannabis is harmful. That's a scientific fact. It can be harmful, let's put it that way, for certain people in certain contexts, just like all drugs can be. The issue, though, that has become like a debate where we're discussing the pros and cons. Well, I think that that just shows that we're a very long way from that societal norm. But I do think we have to put it into context because although many people have tried cannabis, the number of those people who have tried that go on to become regular or even annual users is minuscule. So it's still not as popular as tobacco or alcohol. It's still not as widespread. I think legalization would do a lot to make it more normalized and widespread.
Are you saying that the criminal status of marijuana actually deters use?
There's no doubt about that the criminal status or the fact that it's illegal, let's put it that way, whether it's illegal on a criminal, civil, or other kind of system, like a Portugal type system or whatever. I think there's no doubt that the fact that they're illegal makes them less available than legal drugs, less normalized. In other words, if I started smoking a joint here in this room, even though tobacco was probably banned in this room as well, it would be a lot more taboo for me to smoke a joint right now than tobacco. Even with the fact that you could argue that tobacco is less accepted than marijuana, still the legal status carries a huge weight. And when you take that away completely, I think you do remove a huge deterrent.
I have to say I've been to more than one gig where the social sanction would be the other way around. Particularly in New Zealand, you get looked at pretty strangely if you light up a cigarette indoors. Do you use the phrase harm minimization, and if so, what's it mean to you?
Well, that's a good question because I use that phrase, what we might call harm reduction in the U.S. or harm minimization or risk reduction, only if I can define exactly what it means the second after I say it. So the fact that, unfortunately, the fact has been that phrase has been a centerpiece for shouting matches when it hasn't been defined. So I'm in favor, you're not, you're in favor, I'm not, and we're arguing with each other about why I'm right and you're wrong, as opposed to saying, what do we mean by harm minimization? Do we mean needle exchange programs, or do we mean heroin maintenance? Those are two very different things. Do we mean legalization as a form of harm minimization, or do we mean drug education that emphasizes science? I mean, there's a whole range of different interventions. So for me, it means whatever I'm, defining it as at that point. But the point is, you have to define it when you talk about it. And I've seen this in international fora where you have two countries that most likely agree on 99% of things. Then when you throw a word like that out, nobody knows what it means and it causes a lot of problems. I think the same thing can be said for decriminalization. For a lot of people, when you say decriminalization, it means legalization. For a lot of people, it means no. It's just removing the criminal element of it. And for other people, it means other things. So there are a lot of terms in this debate that get thrown around and are not properly defined.
What does decriminalization mean to you?
Well, I think it means the pure removal of criminal penalties. But I think the vast majority of the media, certainly if you follow the media during the votes in Washington and Colorado, or if you follow other discussions in media, decriminalization and legalization are used interchangeably. In fact, the New Zealand Drug Foundation survey that only found that only a third of New Zealanders were in favor of marijuana decriminalization, yet something like 70% were in favor of a health intervention for kids instead of a criminal intervention, says to me that probably a lot of people are even confused when they were asked that question, because they might have thought that that really means legalization. And for advocates, you're able to define it however makes sense when you're trying to report the results of something or talk about something. So again, it's one of those, I think, very unhelpful terms that really needs to be grounded and defined when you're presenting it.
And finally, where do you think we're going to be on this issue in 5 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think that we will learn from Washington and Colorado, the pros, the cons, et cetera. And we will learn from Uruguay. I mean, they're, frankly, I think, putting a very high bar on the kind of things that they're promising. We'll see if those things happen, and we'll learn. But, I hope we can evolve. Always, our drug policy should always evolve given what the local issues are, which change over time. But what I hope where we're not at is at a place where we rush to judgment that legalization is the only answer to any failings our current policy has. Because if we're already there in 5 years, I think it's going to be very difficult to turn that back.
Kevin Sabet, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.